thinking about something that I hadn't even really wrapped my head around, which is when we go into those perimenopausal years, when you say restore function, you're saying bring back age-appropriate hormones. So a 48-year-old has a different hormonal profile than a 38-year-old.
Absolutely.
And so every woman coming into those perimenopausal years, we tend to be like, oh, you're low in these hormones, you need a patch. But what I hear you saying is, well, let's restore normal function first and see what's there. And if you restore normal function first, like what your body can normally make estrogen, your body can normally make progesterone, even at 48, it can do that.
Yeah.
And then let's see if those symptoms go away, as opposed to just assuming menopause is the problem and let's put a patch on it. What you're saying is let's restore normal function, age-appropriate function, and then let's look what's there. Which, one more thought, because now my mind is completely blown, because I'm thinking, so hot flashes, irritability, trouble sleeping, we have normalized these as menopause symptoms. But if we do your restore function idea, maybe we're not supposed to have those symptoms. Maybe if we just restore normal function, we're not talking about restoring normal ovary function. We're saying backfill in with what needs to be backfilled in, and then let's see if those symptoms are there. Am I thinking this through right?
You're thinking it through perfectly, because I think that's it, is what we've done today is we've medicalized something that's never been medicalized. We didn't even have a word for menopause until 1821.
Oh, wow.
Right? Meno from Greek, pause, stop, like that hot concept here. And that even as far back as, a couple hundred years BC, we would talk about just this natural pause for women. And it was not medicalized.
Which it should be.
Exactly.
And we should be pausing.
Exactly. Here's what's weird to me, Mindy, what I was learning because I've never really gone down the rabbit hole of the historical global, story of menopause. I had no idea, and I'm looking forward to this because it's probably going to be in your book, the average age of women going into menopause up until just about 150 years ago was between the age of 40 and 45.
Okay, wait, but
I know.
But we're living, okay, wait, explain that one to me, because the average is 52 right
Today it's 52. And so it caught me off guard. It made me do a little bit of mental gymnastics. And the difference since 1826 is when we started to see a shift in that early to mid 1800s. Well, what also shifted in that time was the industrial food revolution. Industrialization, the industrial complex began. This was also leading into, civil wars, later to be world wars, different kind of stressors of modern times. We started getting access to things we normally didn't have access to. We started having a lot of metalloestrogens being dumped into our environment via coal-burning plants, which dump an enormous amount of mercury, and mercury is a well-known metalloestrogen. So I started thinking about this, really we started shifting our neuroendocrine systems with the post-industrial revolution movement, which means we started being exposed to hormones endogenously and exogenously, or things that were impacting our hormones exogenously in modern times that we'd never been exposed to before.
Right. Yeah.
And so now basically we have more hormone. Like today we swim in a hormonal soup of exogenous, from plastics to pesticides to, all the things that we have now never been exposed to in human history until the last 150 years or so. And even more so, plastics didn't even come around to the 1960s. So suddenly you're like, oh, we're extending. And we've seen in the literature for hundreds of years and many medical texts that the longer women are exposed to hormones are higher their risk of cancer. That's we were all taught that in medical school. The generations before me were all taught that in medical school, and now we're seeing that women are menstruating later and later in just a short window of time. And so I thought that's really interesting. And so, to your point of normalization, I'm not sure if it's been normal in the past 150 years because of how quickly we've been exposed to new things, and our bodies are struggling to adapt. So the issue is that some of us adapt much better than others.
Right.
And that's where like the SNPs and the diet and the lifestyle choices come into play, is how well do you adapt or not adapt? And how might you evaluate for that, and how might you approach it with that information?
Have you seen women under your care when you were in clinical practice that if they went in at 40 and they changed their diet and they did the herbs you recommended and lifestyle changes that you recommended, did you see them go through menopause with very few symptoms?
Well, it's crazy because a few things. What I would start to teach women well before they got to perimenopause, and what I used to teach at a women's health course up at the college. So I had like 20-somethings, teens and 20-something young women in my class. Thank you, Dr. Marcy Young. If you're listening to this later, she would allow me to come up and speak in that class. A lot of those young women, by the way, have gone off to become naturopaths and other medical practitioners, which was really cool. But I would explain to them is that how your periods are, your experience of your periods and your fertility years is a magic crystal ball of what your menopause will be like.
Ooh, that's
so good. If you had issues in those little windows, you got some shit to clean up before you get to the bridge, right?
Yeah.
And so we start to get clues. The moment we start to express our cycles, the moment menarche starts, the moment our fertility years start, we start to get clues of how bumpy is this ride and how bumpy is it going to be. And so the women who tell me, never had PMS, got pregnant without even thinking about it, no problem with labor and delivery, lactation, no, all the things, didn't have like a flare of Hashimoto's after my babies were born, everything was good. They're like, I never had to work with them through the perimenopause, menopause window. Like it was like a nothing burger, right?
Yeah.
But if I was lucky enough to see someone who had a history of some bumpy roads, like boy, howdy, that's what was good for me. I knew, because while I was still in private practice, I was still menstruating. All right. So I knew, like, by the time I was in my mid-20s, from the things I'd learned, I no longer had PCOS or endometriosis. I had corrected that and cycled like a mofo 28 day, just like clockwork, right? Until the last 2 or 3 years where it was a little bumpy, but that bumpy, I knew what was contributing to it. But it was so smooth compared to all my other friends who didn't pay attention to, it was really bumpy for me through my menopause, my menarche years, my menstruating years, my fertility years. But to your point, when women would come to me at the bumpy start of perimenopause, and we just started to look under the hood and correct those imbalances, it was smooth sailing, right? And we would do the testing of all the things that everyone says you have to get on HRT to correct, like the cardiovascular issues, the dementias, the bone health, all those things. I've never seen those issues in my practice. They just didn't, they would come in with them in some situations, but we'd correct them. We would reverse osteopenia and osteoporosis, not with hormones, ever, right?
It's
we would
funny.
reverse, go ahead.
It's interesting because I, look to my big sister. I look to I have a lot of my friends that are 5 and 10 years older than me. And when things started getting bumpy for me in my late 40s, I went to all of them. Yeah. And none of them were on hormone replacement. Yeah. Most of them were like, it was a no-brainer. It was easy. Yeah. And I kept trying to figure out what my outlier was. Mm-hmm. What was it that was making it difficult for me? And I will tell you that I have finally decided, after taking a year of just by myself and resting and really rehabbing my parasympathetic nervous system, that it was my stress. Mm-hmm. That was the outlier that the other women did not have. Yeah. That my stress load, I was on planes, I was writing books, I was career-driven path. And this year, taking 6 months to be by myself, be at the beach, write this book, slow my life down, rehab my parasympathetic, I feel like my hormones all of a sudden balanced. And it has left me wondering if stress is the outlier. Is that the thing that sends all the symptoms into this accelerated place?
Well, I mean, for my own issues, what I was noticing in those last bump years was precisely that. And Mindy,
Yeah.
how I learned about you and fell in love with you was in reading your, before it got like republished as Menopause Reset,
Yeah.
like your OG, like pretty much like written on the back of a napkin book.
Yeah, it's totally that. And it's, I said the other day to my husband, I'm like, this book actually could stand the test of time in the culture, because it's so simple. Here are the 5 things you do. And I did those. The one that I struggled with was the rushing woman, and it's number 5.
Yeah.
And that was the one I couldn't figure out how to unwind myself. So, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, and it's funny because I have had a lot of people come to me and say, will you read my book and endorse my book? And, I'll get into a few chapters and like, this is really good. And then I get to the chapter like, and then you just write a script pad and replace it all. And I'm like, close the book, put it into a burn pile and move on, because it bums me out because I was waiting for you, right? I guess is what I have to say. So when your book came out and I started like shouting this from the rooftops before I ever even met you, and then to meet you and then to get to know you further, I would say that I have had this mantra my entire practice. So or I can still remember early on in practice, like, well, you don't understand because you're you're way out. It was in my, 30s when I started practicing. And so I would have that, except for when they started improving. And then they're like, this kid knows something, right? But those were, I talked about the 3 S's all the time: sugar, stress, and sex. And specifically, and to when I read your book, I was like, this is freaky. Sugar being insulin. Yep. You will never correct women's hormones if insulin is not brought under control. Period.
Bingo.
Bingo.
But on that, I just want to say, do you know the thousands of comments we've gotten from Fast Like a Girl of women that were like, my hormones balanced, just by following the fasting cycle.
Because
thousands.
Exactly. And it's because that you can't separate out those 3 S's. And so the next one, stress, there's the cortisol. Guess what? When cortisol's high, insulin is high. Yeah. So even if you nail your diet, but you don't nail your stress response, you're going to still be in that dance. And then when I say hormones, everyone thinks I'm going to say, oh, you need progesterone or testosterone or something. No, folks, that's oxytocin. And
we
so
all need
all
oxytocin.
Of us
Can help us all.
It sure can. And guess what? When oxytocin, so as much as he is controversial, the Men Are From Mars, he actually says throw that book away. But Dr. Gray says read the Women on, or what, Mars on Ice and Venus on Fire book, because he actually does get the physiology correct in that book. And he speaks to the fact that when in women, think about this now. We're telling all women that your lack of libido is simply a lack of testosterone. So we put all these women on testosterone. In women, in our physiology, when testosterone is high, oxytocin is low.
Oh, in women.
In women. Actually, in men to some degree, but not to the level it is in women. And so when we're in the ampit, like drive, like you said, rushing woman syndrome, we tend to be in like our dominance of, all the things. Oxytocin's out the window. And so when...
it's so...
please.
It's interesting. I'm like a human guinea pig. If I learn anything, I'm like, let me try it on myself.
Always.
So I've played with the exogenous hormones, and I played with testosterone. I had to get off of it because the rage that came out of me, I was like, there was no oxytocin. There was just anger, and I might have had the wrong dosage and things like that. But that maps to what you're saying right there.